After I finished my service as a lone soldier in the Israeli army, I realized this was my defining moment. It's time for me to build success, create stories, and the financial freedom that I never had before. I used to be trapped with money, and now it empowers me. Since then, I've developed a multi-million-dollar financial advisory business, a podcast that has been featured on all the global media stations around the world. One of my favorite things to do is educate people on the mindset to build resilient wealth, build success, and have fun doing it. In my show, you will not only get best-of-class tips, amazing stories, a bunch of laughs, but you'll also get a mindset shift from a family of people who have come from nothing and will help you be ready to succeed. Welcome to the Resilient Riches Podcast. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're talking about Jonathan Greenblatt, who's the CEO of the ADL, who's been basically, the ADL is one of the largest Jewish organizations probably in the country that's been fighting specifically towards anti-Semitism. The questions we've been hearing from people a lot is, why is anti-Semitism so rampant when we've been spending so much money, so much time, so much effort fighting it, and how come it feels like we're losing? So I wanted to get a little bit more insight specifically from you on exactly what is going on, why we're not winning, or are we winning and maybe people don't know it, and is there a future of Judaism in the U.S.? How should Jews look about money? So let's get right into it. Can you give us a 30-second background of your background, and then we'll get right into it?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be on the podcast and sitting here with you today. A little bit about myself. So I've been the CEO of ADL for the last 10 years. Prior to this, I was both in the private sector and in public service. So I have a background in economics and worked in the Clinton administration, the Commerce Department, and then the White House, doing international economic policy, like applied microeconomics with an emphasis on international trade and investment. And then I worked in the Obama White House in the West Wing. I ran the Office of Social Innovation for the President, which was an office he created to use innovation, kind of new models, to accelerate economic recovery and boost job creation. And he wanted someone who'd actually generated economic returns and created jobs to run it. I had done that in the work I did between my public service. So I was early as a product manager at a company, pre-IPO company called Realtor.com, that ended up going public. I ended up running all consumer products at the business when it was publicly traded on the NASDAQ. Today it's owned by News Corp. I co-founded with my roommate from business school a company called Ethos Water, which is a bottled water that used part of its profits to help children get clean water. We started that at my house in Los Angeles, scaled that, eventually sold it to Starbucks, and then I worked at Starbucks, ran the bottled water business for Howard Schultz, and grew it to a pretty reasonable size. I left that and then ran a little media company, and then we ended up taking out a venture that Google incubated, and I was inside Google for about 3.5 years, building something called All for Good, that we scaled, raised a bunch of money, and then that got acquired in 2011.
Nice.
So I've had a few sort of startups that have either gone public or had trade sales, and I've worked at pretty high levels in the policymaking process, but none of that, if you will, prepared me in some ways for the job that I have now. I mean, I came to ADL without any nonprofit experience. I'm not a lawyer, it's a civil rights organization, and I'm a Jewish person, but being Jewish was something I did at home. Being Jewish for me was keeping a kosher home, observing Shabbat, going to shul for the Chagim, celebrating with my family. Being Jewish was not what I did, if you will, on a day-to-day basis at work. So it has been an incredible ride over the last decade. And so while in some ways I feel like I came to the job, again, without any relevant experience, in fact, what I learned inside Google, what I learned inside Starbucks, what I learned taking companies out, what I learned working in very high pressure situations in the White House, I think prepared me very well for what we're dealing with today.
Gotcha. So, it sounds like you have an amazing history, and we've had a lot of people who have scaled, sold companies come on this podcast. But the question is, why would they take a corporate person? So what happens a lot is people make a lot of money, and then they go into the nonprofit sector, or they go into work public policy or something like that. What was the thing that incentivized you to go into public service when you could have just continued scaling and selling companies and continue in the profit sector?
Let me be clear. When I went to work in government, I left a very comfortable life in California, and the deal that I cut with my wife, if you will, is we would relocate our family, I have 3 children, to DC for a short-term gig. And then we'd go back to California, go back to making money. But when I got the offer to take this job at ADL, I was not incentivized as much as I was inspired. I mean, I've always wanted to change the world. That's always how I've thought. the decisions I've made in my career have never been the profit maximization path. It's always been sort of the impact maximization path. And it's worked out well for me. I'm very grateful. But when this opportunity came up, the reality is that I felt like it was a call to service. And in fact, when I got the offer, it wasn't what I was expecting. I called my rabbi. So I'm from LA, or I lived there for a very long time. And my rabbi is David Wolpe, who's the rabbi at Sinai Temple, a big conservative shul. And I called Rabbi Wolpe and I said, I've got this offer. I don't know what to do. I don't know that I'm qualified for the job. It's not what I expected, nor was it the plan. And Rabbi Wolpe said, to make a long story short, the Lord works in mysterious ways, but this is a call to service. And so I took the job because I felt like it was indeed a call to service. But I also took the job, Yair, because anti-Semitism has shaped my life. I mean, I'm the grandson of a Holocaust survivor from Germany who, was born and raised there, thought he would always live there. And then the Nazis came and everything changed.
Yeah.
And he came here in his late 20s.
So he didn't have that call to service that you had.
Nope. But his life was forever shaped by his Jewish identity.
Yeah.
And then I'm married to an Iranian woman who came to the United States as a political refugee in the late 1980s. Again, my wife was born and raised before the revolution, lived through the Islamic Revolution, lived through the Iran-Iraq War, and then came as a refugee after escaping Iran, as a teenager. So I say that because my wife, growing up as a young girl, never expected to come to the United States. But again, anti-Semitism shaped her life. So my grandfather's grandchildren weren't raised in Germany. I'm here. My wife's grandchildren, God willing, won't be raised in Iran. They're going to be here, I hope. But if I want that to happen, I'm going to have to fight for what we have.
Yeah.
So I just think as a Jewish person, I'm long on America, Yair. I'm a proud patriot. I love this country. I love everything about it. But we have our work cut out for us, and we can't take what we have here for granted.
So let's talk about that for a minute. And also, my wife's Persian. I'm a little Persian. My great-grandfather's brother was actually the first person that was killed in the streets and started the revolution. It was Habib El-Ghanian. I've spoken on many times. Yeah. That's my grandmother. My grandmother won the Presidential Medal of Freedom. I know.
The Al-Ghanian family is a very big
deal. Big time. It's part of the
So you're part of that family.
My grandmother's not Iranian. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. So she won. Actually, it's a long story, but I don't want to get lost into that. Let's talk.
Everybody knows that. So the Al-Ghanian family, the dad
Habib. That was my great uncle.
He was hung from a crane by the regime. These despicable, disgusting people, after they had cut a deal with the Jewish community, after the rabbis went to them and the community leaders and said to Khomeini, like, look, we want things to work out okay. And he basically said, we'll let you. He kind of worked it out. And then they intentionally murdered your great uncle in order to send a message to the community that you're actually.
And it sent a real message to the entire community.
100%.
And it's a big part of, like, we've been very involved in like talking about the Persian culture and talking about that and really amplifying those voices, because we're Persian and my wife is fully Persian. My wife's Mashadi, but it's a little different. So you said a couple things that I want to delve a little deeper into. You are long on America, but don't you feel that there's crippling rights who are coming after the Jews and crippling ultra lefts that are also coming after the Jews? Do you think that, like, people are swaying, or America is not long for the Jews? Like, what do we need to do to keep the Jews stationed in America? And do you think we're fighting a losing battle?
Well, look, this is the question of our time. We as Jewish people, I mean, if you just step back, I think America, put Israel aside for a moment, or Medina Israel aside, like, America has been the best place for the Jewish people in our 2,000 plus years of diaspora. No country has embraced us. No country has given us the opportunities. No country has enabled us to thrive like we have here. Just none have. America has been a remarkable experiment in democracy and in pluralism. But make no mistake, there are very real, I would call them urgent challenges from the far right, from the hard left, from the political Islamists in our midst, from Christian nationalists in our midst, from people who would marginalize us, from people who would persecute us, from people who would push us aside if given the opportunity to do so. So the trick is not to let them win. And in fairness, this year we celebrate the 250th birthday, if you will, of the United States. In 250 years, those people have not won. They're not new. They've always been here. We've had communists. We've had fascistic people. We've had, again, Christian nationalists. We've had other religious extremists. This has happened, generation after generation. And yet, Yair, we've always won. When I say we, I mean the forces of good, those forces of pluralism, those forces that recognize that Jewish people and all people here who want to play ball have an opportunity to get on this field and to thrive.
Yeah.
We've got to fight for that.
I agree. There's a great organization called CUFI. I'm sure you know. Christians Unite for Israel. They have over 10 million members. There's 90 million evangelical Christians in the U.S. I mean, there is a lot of people that are pro. So I do think we have to just embrace them and really connect a little bit further and go, these are the people that are going to be around in America for forever. These are real people, but we need to keep these forces fighting.
So the Pew Charitable Trust has done studies for many years.
Yep.
And they've done studies of how different religious minorities are perceived. Year after year, or study after study, the Jewish minority, if you will, the Jewish people in the United States are considered the most respected religious minority by the others.
Mm-hmm.
And in this country, for many, many years, anti-Semitic attitudes were at a historic low. I mean, ADL, we're the oldest anti-hate organization in the country. One of the things that we've been doing for decades and decades is measuring anti-Jewish attitudes. We have a whole center in anti-Semitism research run by a Stanford PhD, a bunch of PhDs on staff. And we do all kinds of research, including every 2 to 3 years. We assess how the majority population feels about the Jewish community. And since we started doing this in the early 1960s, those numbers have more or less ranged between 8 and 12%. Every study, meaning between 8 and 12% of the general population, expresses what we would consider intense anti-Semitic attitudes. Now, look, we did the study in 2019. It was 11%. That's still a lot of people.
Yeah.
But that's within the historic range that we saw for decades and decades.
Well, you had the KKK had 4 million members at a point.
That's true.
That's a lot of people.
What's notable is that 2019, it was 11%. That's in the range. But then we did it again in 2022. That number went from 11 to 20%.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2024, it went up to 24%. So what's troubling is that in the last 5+ years, the percent of the population with intense anti-Semitic attitudes has more than doubled.
Okay. So
That's concerning.
Let's talk about that in the boardroom. I know what you're doing right now with bringing in different, I don't want to speak specifically on it, on companies that you guys are acquiring to talk specifically on money and how the Jewish people need to be addressed in the boardroom. Sorry if I'm stumbling, but it's really important to understand what is actually happening right now in the boardroom when it comes to our finances and how there is Jewish discrimination inside of companies, and what are the Jews doing to combat that?
Great question. So let's just step back. Anti-Semitism, they call it the oldest hatred. It manifests in many different fronts, right? We see it in politics, as you were alluding to before. We see it in culture, and we certainly see it in the workplace. And I've been very concerned, we have at ADL in recent years, about how it's beginning to penetrate into the boardroom, particularly in the form of the BDS movement. For your listeners, that's the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions movement, which in theory targets the Jewish state of Israel. In practice, it's an anti-Semitic campaign that ends up implicating all Jewish people.
Yep.
It doesn't seek a two-state solution. It seeks to simply undermine and eradicate the Jewish state. That's its goal. And again, all Jews you find when there's a BDS campaign, all Jews end up suffering. Nobody says, how do you feel about, the Palestinian people? Nobody says, what's your view on Bibi Netanyahu? We just see when BDS campaigns are implemented, all Jews are affected.
Yep.
Okay, so we've been alarmed about this for some time. So we've been trying to study what's happening in workplaces. Our Center on Antisemitism Research did a study, I believe 2 years ago, that looked at discrimination in hiring. We found, by running a study where you had a set of resumes with sort of a blank generic name, and then a set of resumes with all the same qualifications and the same experiences, except the name was changed so that it sounded Jewish, and there was some Jewish activities on the resume. And then a third resume, all the same experiences and qualifications, except was an Israeli name with Israeli-related experiences. The Jewish person with that resume had to file nearly 25% more times to get the same number of callbacks as the non-Jewish resume. The Israeli person, 40% more.
Wow.
So we can see a statistically significant trend and it resonates and reaffirms what we have heard anecdotally, that Jewish people are not getting callbacks, that Jewish people are not getting promotions, that Jewish people are experiencing discrimination in the workplace. Again, not necessarily for their performance, but because of their ethnicity or their faith.
So what is the solution to this? So it's great to study it.
Well, that's one part, right?
Correct.
So that is alarming. And then we've also seen the BDS campaign go after public companies, where literally activists in the last year alone, in the calendar year 2025, 75 different S&P companies were targeted for BDS campaigns. When I say targeted, I mean, again, the activists go after them, they harass them, they malign them, they target them at shareholders meetings, they target them in letter writing campaigns, and so on and so forth. They try to pass shareholder resolutions, etc. So being alarmed about this for a while, a few years ago, we connected with a small nonprofit called J-Lens. Now, J-Lens did sort of ESG advisory services for Jewish philanthropies and foundations. I'm helping them to take some of their corpus and invest it Jewishly. We thought it was a great set of capabilities that we didn't have. And part of my view about ADL is we're a platform. We have scale, so we can engage with smaller organizations and they can leverage our scale, right? And sort of amortize the cost of what we've built and harness it for their own purposes. So J-Lens is now an affiliate of ADL, and J-Lens applied for an RIA license to the SEC, which they got. And then J-Lens last year listed on the New York Stock Exchange an exchange-traded fund under the ticker symbol TOV to help us fight BDS in the boardroom.
So now you're taking shareholder positions and
Exactly.
being able to actually say, hey, no, we represent.
This is the first publicly traded Jewish ETF in history. And indeed, we're taking positions in almost all the S&P companies. Now, we are excluding like tobacco stocks.
Yeah, sin stocks.
Sin stocks, if you will, some of them, not most, just a couple. But more importantly, we are going to exclude companies that engage in the BDS campaign and try to make sure the companies that aren't, again, bullied into that by the activists.
Yeah.
So like last year alone, I think the last 2 years, we've been in hundreds of proxy votes. Last year, we led the most successful sort of human rights related shareholder resolution against Meta, got nearly 49% of the votes from independent directors, which is great, and shareholders. And we're going to keep pushing, Yair. We're going to keep pushing to make sure we keep the companies honest. And again, don't allow bullying tactics, which, by the way, cost the shareholders money.
Yep.
So here's the thing. BDS is not just bad politics, and it's not just sort of hypocritical morals. It's bad for business.
Yep.
Because of the benefits of being invested in the Jewish state and the economic returns generated by the equities that are playing there.
So I've been talking a lot and I've been very, very vocal since October 7th. And I feel like this is just a personal feeling. I feel like the Jewish Americans took a very big hit defending the Israeli Jews, which I would do 10 times out of 10 and never not think about it. But it keeps happening. This anti-Semitism keeps happening and they keep coming after the Jewish Americans. The Jewish Americans, I think, can stay around forever. But the question is, now that they're aligning Jews and Israelis together, what is the future of Israeli Jews in the U.S.?
That's a good
Are
question.
they going to be separated out? Because I know a lot of American Jews are going, I don't want to deal with the Israeli Jews anymore.
So I don't know so much about that, but I do think anti-Semitism is sort of like a hydra-headed monster, right? And one of the things about it, it shows up in many ways, as we said, and it's also quite adaptive and it morphs. So indeed, today you're seeing Israeli businesses discriminated against.
Bread's Bakery. I just wrote in Jewish News Syndicate about it.
It's really pretty awful.
Yeah.
I've been down there. We know the person organizing the union, if you will, telling this company owned by an Israeli American has to break ties with Israel. It's just bananas. Really, it's silly.
It's crazy. They didn't win, but it's crazy.
It's being led by one of the activists from Columbia University,
who
led the terribly like pro-Hamas campaign against the Jewish and Israeli students there, against Zionists. So let's be honest, whether they call us Israelis or they call us Zionists or they call us cosmopolitans or they call us globalists, it's all about Jews.
Yeah.
And so I don't think we have the luxury of saying, oh, it's only coming for X or it's only coming for Y. This ultimately embroils all of us.
Agreed. And I think the Jewish community needs to embrace, and we're all one now.
Am Yisrael Chai. Like, I agree with you entirely.
Yeah.
I think Jewish unity across national lines, again, whether you're Israeli or American, by the way, across political lines, whether you're a Democrat or Republican or not registered at all, across ethnic lines, whether you're Ashkenazi or Sephardi or Mizrahi, Ethiopian, Persian, however you identify, religious, secular, we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it's not even just about us, Yair. Here's the thing. It's about America. Because these attacks on us, because we might pray differently, or because we come from somewhere different, that is not just anti-Semitic, although it is. It's fundamentally anti-American. And this year, when we celebrate our 250th, this year, when we honor all things about our country that make it great, the idea that you would call out a minority within our country because of their difference, literally, I think it undermines the very creed and the sort of civic fabric that hold us together.
Agreed. And that's how America was built. It was built on immigrants. It was built on innovation. It was built on diversity and understanding different cultures.
All of it.
So let's talk a little bit about the ADL for a second.
Sure.
And there's a couple questions. Do you think the ADL failed its mission in terms of this rampant anti-Semitism? Because it's kind of your job.
Yeah. Well, look, the ADL's been around for 113 years. We're the oldest anti-hate organization in America. I have to acknowledge we were around in the 1930s when anti-Semitism spiked, and we saw that culminated in the Shoah in Europe and the annihilation of European Jewry. I have to admit, ADL was around in the late 1960s after the 67 war, when kind of radicalism spread on the left, like an anti-Israel radicalism, if you will. That's real too. And I have to admit, like, ADL's around now when we've seen this really awful rise of anti-Semitism. And I'll explain, like, I can tell you definitively, quantitatively, it's happening. It's not just some anecdotal feedback. Although we did a study last year, we found that more than 50% of Jews, 50% of American Jews have either directly experienced or observed anti-Semitism in the last 12 months.
Yep.
And all our data bears this out. Now, we have 3 lines of business at ADL, okay? 3 lines of business. We protect, we advocate, we educate. First, we protect. We do that by measuring and responding to incidents. This is the biggest thing we do. Like I said, we measure attitudes. We also track incidents. Last year alone, we tracked more than 9,350 anti-Semitic incidents. These are acts of harassment, vandalism, or violence. Every call, email, online form that gets filled out, my staff responds to it. We have 24 offices and another 6 satellite offices. The number one thing ADL does is we are on the ground when your kid gets bullied at school. The police won't help you, but we will. When your college student gets harassed, the administration won't help you, but we will. When you get discriminated against at your workplace, again, you can't call the FBI, but you can call the ADL. So the number one thing we do is we respond when something happens and help the victim. So under protect, we track and respond. Secondly, we monitor and disrupt. We have a whole apparatus monitoring extremist movements. We use a kind of open source intelligence, and we track right-wing extremists, left-wing radicals, political Islamists, like I said before. And we work directly with law enforcement when there's a threat targeting a Jewish individual or an institution. So again, we stop crimes before they happen when we see someone who's got capability, intent, and we can determine where they are. So we're monitoring social media, video games, podcasts, Substacks, discussion boards, name it.
Everything.
Yeah. And thirdly, we train law enforcement. We're the largest trainer of law enforcement in the country on extremism and hate. We train tens of thousands of officers every year. So under protect, we keep the community safe. Then we advocate. That's sort of line of business number 2. Political advocacy, at the federal, state, and local level. Legal advocacy in the courts. We've launched more lawsuits in the past 12 months than the prior 112 years. And of course, shareholder advocacy, as we're talking about here. And then finally, we educate. And we educate in classrooms, one of the largest providers in America of anti-hate content in schools, reach 4.5 million kids a year. But increasingly, education doesn't happen in classrooms. It happens in the culture. So right now, we're very focused on the LLMs and Wikipedia and sort of the code around us, as well as sports and entertainment, where values get shaped. To come back to your predicate question, which is, have we failed? I think all of us, ADL, all the other Jewish groups, we all got to own the fact that while we might have seen some things coming before October the 7th, everything changed after October the 7th. So we have had to acknowledge we need to do things differently, because our core purpose at ADL is to protect the Jewish people. And in light of this surge of anti-Jewish hate, we got to do things differently. So we've sunsetted programs. We've gotten out of certain lines of work. We've shut down centers inside ADL altogether. And we've redoubled and redeployed our resources specifically toward fighting anti-Semitism, even as we've tried new techniques. So again, I would say the TOVE ETF, moving into the boardroom, is a new technique. Litigating at scale is a new technique. We've launched artificial intelligence tools to help people when they experience anti-Semitism, to help educators more effectively. New technique. I think all these Jewish organizations have got to innovate. They have got to take risks. They have to acknowledge where they've fallen short, like we've fallen short, and they got to do things differently. And that's what we're trying to do at ADL.
Well, one thing that also I get a lot of questions on is the cost of running these organizations and the flow through rate of like actually getting down to the dollars. So for example, I give $100 and 50 of it goes to administrative costs, 50 actually gets to the streets and to the actual advocacy. I know you are a very labor intensive and very service oriented organization.
Yeah.
How do you run it that it's lean enough that it can be, the dollars can be used, but also staffed well enough with high quality people? Like they're not hiring someone like you for $75,000. It's just not going to, then they're not going to get good people. So how are you balancing that entire juggling act to continue incentivizing successful people to work in the organization that are effective?
There's a lot to talk about in that. So look, I'd never run a nonprofit before, but I've run some pretty reasonably sized consumer brands. And I've worked in some pretty large organizations, right? Whether it's, again, the federal government or big public equities. And I am trying to run this organization like the businesses I'm familiar with. So literally, I have about 400, I can tell you, I have 464 employees, full-time employees. I also have other sort of part-time folks and consultants, but 464 people operating, like I said, in 30 offices. And I am focused, we have a 5-year plan. We have an annual operating plan. We have quarterly goals. Everybody's got KPIs. So I am driving this thing hard. And like any enterprise, for-profit, nonprofit, we are focused on ensuring we have adequate resources to do the work and then delivering an ROI so that our, in this case, donors.
They're your partners.
I would say so. I would say they're my shareholders.
Yep.
I would say they're my investors.
Yep.
So that they see a return on that investment and they want to continue to, again, support ADL. Now, they're not maybe buying a product and they may not be subscribing for a service, but they are donating because they believe in the work. And we have to deliver a value proposition that meets or exceeds their expectations in order for them to continue to invest. So all that being said, like, how do we get it done? Well, again, number one, we are not trying to be like the best Jewish nonprofit. I hope that we are. We are trying to operate as literally as an impact driving, high performing, world-class organization, period. And margin earning so that we earn more each year than we spend, but we try to be just about break even.
Yeah.
And any additional profits we may make just get redeployed back into the organization. I mean, we're a nonprofit. I can't deliver, look, when I worked in the business world, I could give big bonuses to people. I could give stock options to people. I could give other kind of, incentives in order to motivate them. Here at ADL, it's all about the mission. So we are focused, and make sure people understand what is our core purpose: to protect the Jewish people. What is our mission statement? To stop the defamation of the Jewish people, secure just fair treatment to all. And what are our key lines of business that everyone's being evaluated against? So at the end of the day, again, we are focused on trying to turn the dial and sort of bring anti-Semitism down. We are focused every day on delivering value to the people that we serve. Quite frankly, here I work for you. As a member of the Jewish community, it's my job to protect you and your wife, and your children and your family. I work for you, and every single person in my organization does as well. So we really see ourselves, look, we're a nonpartisan organization, I should say, as a tax-exempt nonprofit. So it's our job to call balls and strikes. Doesn't matter if the person at the plate's wearing a red jersey or a blue jersey. Everything may seem very political these days or very partisan. It's our job to stick to our guns, to focus on our core, and to make sure that you and your family are protected.
Yeah, agreed. Last question before my dad jumps in. Is it profitable to be a Jew? And how can Jewish business owners succeed right now and make more money and be more successful? How can Jewish people become more and more successful? What is the angle right now that they should be approaching?
Well, I'm not the guy I'll just say a couple things. So number one, is it probably a Jew? Like I wouldn't, that question should be thought about a little bit differently. Look, I think our Jewish values should inform the way that we do business in terms of being ethical, in terms of seeing responsibility to the person on the other side of the table, if you will, in terms of building long-term relationships, right? Built on mutual respect. Those things are real. So if you, again, I think, look at the world through a Jewish lens that's grounded in Torah values, I think the long-term prospects are great. That's how I would see it. Mm-hmm. So it's not about, is it probably a Jew? It's about how can you use Jewish values to be more effective as a human being, and that will make you better at business, I believe, if you stick to those values.
So the question, let me reframe it. The question is, we have a very Jewish brand, and it's helped our brand also. But there was a lot of times when we first started that people would text us or call me and say, "Hey, I have a problem with you being a Jew." Like, I actually got those calls.
Wow.
And I had the typical greedy Jews.
From clients or
from clients. Right. Clients. Wow. Oh, I'm a Jew, but I'm not a Zionist. You're a problem with you being a Zionist. And it hurt. Like, we run assets. It hurts when you lose assets. Sure. It hurts when you lose clients. But when we took such a strong stance, what happened was the Jewish community rallied, and they saw what was happening, and they rallied and started partnering with us. So I think I want to get to the message of, why should Jews own their Jewish identity in the workforce, and it will actually help them be more successful instead of hiding that they are a Jewish brand?
Well, I will tell you this. I think being Jewish is not something you can do on the side. The days of thinking, well, I can just be Jewish at night, or I can just be Jewish on the weekends, or I can just be Jewish on Shabbat, are over. That doesn't mean you have to worship a particular way. It doesn't mean you need to wrap tefillin every day. That doesn't mean you need to daven in a certain denominational style. But it does mean, I think we are better, we are stronger when we own our identities. And I actually think it's an interesting question. You didn't exactly ask me this, but like, when you talk about how we do it, the reality is the best defense against anti-Semitism is a good offense. When I say good offense, it means owning our Jewish identity, embracing our Jewish identity, and exemplifying Jewish values with everything that we do. And again, like, I'm not telling anyone that they need to like go to synagogue, or pray 3 times a day. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that our Jewish identity courses through our veins, and we are gifted with this covenantal identity. We are gifted with this relationship to God. And I think we can embrace that, and all things are possible.
Yeah, I think speaking to your point, kind of wrapping things up, is yes, there is a lot of discrimination against Israelis and Jews when you're putting out resumes and things like that. But if you do stay proud to what you are, God will answer your call, and you will be more successful for it. It might not be today. It might not be tomorrow. You might not get that promotion. But as long as you stay proud, you will find a place that you will be more and more successful. I'm going to drop this over to my dad.
Sure.
Nice to meet you, and just hearing some fantastic things from you today, Jonathan. It's just I mean, from the spiritual side also, I mean, it's just amazing. And I think one of the areas is that October 7th really mobilized us as a Jewish people, as you pointed out.
Yeah.
And it didn't make a difference, go to shul, don't go to shul. Sephardic. My wife is Sephardic. As you heard, my mother-in-law is Iranian, and her uncle was the one that was hung in Iran, and you're very familiar with that.
Yeah.
But I got just a couple of points, and I got a couple of questions just to ask. What would you say? I mean, I grew up in Toronto. The anti-Semitism in Canada is worse than in the United States. I mean, it's just crazy what's going on over there. Is that because you're not over in Canada? They don't have a similar organization there to fight on our side to give people pause before they will commit some anti-Semitism act?
It's a good question. I mean, so we'll talk about Canada. I'll just say here in the United States, ADL has been fighting. We started fighting Nazi sympathizers in the 1930s. We fought the John Birch Society and the KKK in the 50s, right? We fought sort of Hamas affiliates here and National Socialists in the 80s and 90s. Like today, it's the GDL from the right it's SJP from the left, it's QAnon, all of it. And we do this work because it's why we were created again 113 years ago to protect the Jewish people. Now in Canada, B'nai B'rith of Canada and CJA do some very good work to try to represent the community and fight the anti-Semites. And the issues there are interesting. You know, we do annual surveys of attitudes every few years. It's called the Global 100. We ran it in 2024. We literally surveyed 102 countries, including Canada, to understand, again, the perception of Jews among the non-Jewish population. Canada has some of the lowest incidents of anti-Semitic attitudes in the Western world. Truly, the majority of Canadians bear no anti-Semitism, or in relative terms, an extraordinarily low degree of anti-Semitism. However, what's happened, particularly since October the 7th, is you've seen a radicalization in Canada, and you've seen what I would call sort of radical left-wing forces partner with like hardened Islamist voices and literally threatening Jewish communities in the places where they live, in the Jewish neighborhoods in Montreal, in Toronto, and in other cities, literally going into those neighborhoods to harass Jewish people outside their homes or outside their shuls. It is revolting. And I think why we got there is not so much because of the Jewish organizations, it's because of the lack of enforcement of the Canadian government and a failure to protect their own Jewish citizens. Now, in fairness, we saw this in many Western countries. You know, the ADL runs a group called the J7, the 7 largest Jewish communities in the diaspora. That's America, Canada, Germany, France, the UK, Argentina, and Australia. This is a group like the G7, the largest economies in the world. The J7 are the largest Jewish communities in the world. And they meet. This group has summits every year. The last one was in Australia, of all places, a week before Bondi Beach. This group has weekly or bi-weekly Zoom meetings. They're in touch every single day. And what I can tell you is the issues, France, Germany, UK, America, Australia, and Canada are the same. You have sort of a more emboldened left-wing extremist movement, which has taken up the Hamas cause. You have Islamists who feel increasingly empowered in the system. And you also have kind of a fringe on the far right that is more and more activated. And this is a toxic combination for Jewish people wherever they live.
I mean, that would be the same here. And I mean, that some of that I would assume is why Mamdani is now mayor of New York City.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing this podcast today in New York City. And the reality is, as you and your listeners might know, the ADL has been very outspoken about our concerns about Assemblyman Mamdani and then candidate Mamdani and now Mayor Mamdani because of his track record. When I say that, the legislation he introduced as an assemblyman, like the Not in Our Dime Act, that only targeted Jewish companies, it was ridiculous. Or he was a student organizer for SJP at Bowdoin College as an undergrad. Or the fact that as a candidate, he talked about adopting BDS. He talked about wanting to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu. I mean, it's amazing how he was outspoken literally on October the 8th. You know, hours after the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, he was outspoken, expressing his rage against the Jewish state. I don't think I've heard him say a single thing about the scores of thousands of people murdered in cold blood in Iran in the last few weeks.
Nobody
Literally,
said anything. Nobody.
Yeah.
There hasn't been anybody said anything.
Yeah, I mean, many politicians haven't said anything, but specifically, I'm talking about him in this instance. So look, his selective focus on the Jewish state, the set of policies he's proposed to introduce, which again could create economic pain for New Yorkers, let alone unfairly single out and target Jewish people. All of this concerns me. So look, but I will say is to step back. I noted before, we're a nonpartisan organization. I don't really care how he votes. I care what he values. And he is the mayor, and we have to work with the mayor. Our hope would be that Mayor Mamdani would recognize the legitimate needs of his Jewish, constituents. There are more than 1 million of them in this city. And it is the city where Jews have experienced more anti-Semitism than any other municipality in the United States. And so my hope would be that the mayor would realize his responsibilities and get away from his obsession with the Jewish state and just focus on the needs of his Jewish constituents, as he should focus on the needs of all his constituents. And again, treat them with dignity and respect, not with, not to degrade them or reprimand them simply because of their nationality or their faith.
And that should be enough to keep him busy. The last question I want to have is, when we started after October 7th, we started the podcast. We had a lot of people, a lot of Israelis, and even though Israel is known as the startup nation, of course, and they sold all their startups billions of dollars, et cetera, they always say that we've always been behind on the fight in the social media. That has always been an issue, and always the problem that the Iran or their proxies have put in millions and billions of dollars over the last 20 years. But you haven't mentioned anything about that either. I mean, everything you're doing, of course, is fantastic. But on the social media side, it looks like we're still far, far behind.
So there are a few things. So, if we ask, how do we get in this position where we're in? And, you're kind of asked that question in so many words. I think number one, and we're living in this highly polarized moment, and in a highly polarized moment where people have retreated to the edge, right, to their political home. Extremists often get emboldened in that environment, and that's happening. Emboldening extremists is bad for our community, number one. Number two, distrust is so high in institutions, cynicism about the media, about government, et cetera. And in an environment where cynicism is pervasive, conspiracies tend to be the coin of the realm, and sort of anti-Semitism is the oldest conspiracy. And conspiracism and anti-Semitism go hand in hand. And then thirdly, social media is a super spreader of all of this. Social media is like the single most consequential amplifier of anti-Semitism we've ever seen. So indeed at ADL, we're deeply concerned. We launched a Center on Technology and Society. This was in 2017 because we believed Facebook was the front line in fighting hate. It still is, from Facebook to X to messaging apps like WhatsApp and Signal, to short form video apps like Instagram and TikTok. Yeah, this is the battle space today. And by the way, now we're living in a world where Wikipedia and the LLMs that it powers are invisibly shaping our environments. So we are super focused on this, working with the companies, try to get them to do the right thing and simply enforce their own terms of service, working to monitor the problems much more effectively. But ultimately, if you ask me, I think what we need is legislation. Now, I say this as someone who's been an entrepreneur, who's worked in Silicon Valley, who's always had a very, let's say, laissez-faire approach on this stuff. Before I took this job, I thought government should just stay out of Silicon Valley. Now I'm convinced that these companies on their own will never self-regulate effectively. That at some point, we simply need to ensure that social media companies live by the same rules as traditional media companies. They have an exemption. It's called Section 230. That means if the companies publish libel, they're not liable for it. So whereas if, in print media or on broadcast or on radio or on billboards or in any other venue, if you print something slanderous, you can be sued for it. There's a carve out in the law that exempts the social media companies for any responsibility for what they publish. Ultimately, I want the companies to enforce their own rules. Ultimately, I want to fight more effectively on those platforms myself. But in the end of the day, we need government to just make them play by the same rules as every other business in the world. That's what I think needs to happen.
Those people that came on the podcast, they said that we don't put enough money into content. We don't have enough to fight. They do it. They have 10 pieces of content, anti-Semitic. We have one.
Yeah, I've seen kind of analyses of things like TikTok that talk about this issue, about the volume problem. Look, maybe your audience knows it. Most Americans don't realize there are only 15, 16 million Jews on the planet Earth. And in a world of more than 9 billion people, we are a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. So that numbers game is
Israel's a tiny dot on the map. It's a tiny dot.
The tiniest, right? Like the size of New Jersey. in a world where there are, the neighborhood that Israel is in, I mean, it is the smallest of the small. That's why the obsession with so many on the Jewish state, I mean, strikes us, and I think reasonably so, as not being about what the state is doing, right? Not being about what the state is working on. It's being about what the state is. I mean, we've seen anti-Semitism evolve over the years. It used to be anti-Judaism, where they thought the Jewish religion was illegitimate. Then it became anti-Semitism, a racialized hatred. They thought the Jewish race was illegitimate. Now it's anti-Zionism, where they say it's the Jewish state that's illegitimate. But whether it's a nation-focused or a race-focused or a religion-focused kind of hate, it always comes back to the same thing, hating us simply because we're different. So at the end of the day, there is this reality that the country faces, like we as a people have faced throughout our existence. However, I think the Jewish people are a miracle. Our survival over all these eons is not extraordinary, right? It's a divine act. And so in my opinion, we simply have to dig deep and do better. So yeah, I know that the numbers game is tough, but we have something going for us, right? Which is Hashem. We have something going for us, which is we're on the right side of history. We have something going for us, which is our extraordinary ability to punch above our weight. So I think we need to draw on those capabilities. I think we need to take inspiration from and draw energy from our creative and our just extraordinary talent. And that's ultimately how we win.
So I just want to sum up today.
Love it.
Thank you. I just want to sum up on two things today, and I just want to talk to our audience. So there are very successful Jews out there that have made a lot of money and been incredibly successful that need to go into the nonprofit sector and specifically on the Jewish causes, exactly like you did. So if you are someone that have made the money and can run efficiency programs and can do things more efficiently, we need you.
100%.
We need a lot of you, because it's just to even get past what it is to live a Jewish life is so hard. So what happens is all the really talented people have to run into the profit sector to cover our expenses.
Well, you're saying something quite important here, Yair, like really important. Like, how do we win if all of us are on Wall Street?
Yep.
Or if all of us
Correct.
are in Hollywood, or if all of us are in, XYZ field, like we lose. We need our talent to show up in all these different spaces. And so, look, I made a decision that was right for me and my family for a bunch of different reasons to take this job. It has been a very challenging job in lots of ways over these last decade. But if you're a Jewish person listening and you have that energy and you have that passion and you're ready to direct it, look, I don't think there's a more noble cause than public service. And I think I've worked, again, for taxpayers. I've worked for investors. I've worked for shareholders. Now I'm working for the Jewish people. And it is the highest calling of all. But on the other hand, if you're not ready to make that leap full time, 24/7 or 24/6, as it were, for me, then I'd encourage you could be a donor. You could be a volunteer. You could be a consumer of media. You could be just a more digitally responsible consumer in general and support our people. Yeah. So I think everyone needs to find their way to add value. And I would encourage your audience, your listeners, to think about what can they do best. But here's the ultimate thing. You can't sit on the sidelines. Democracy is not a spectator sport. And being Jewish itself is a contact sport. We've got to be in it to win it. And we don't just owe it to ourselves and our children, although I think we do. We owe it to the Alganians. We owe it to those who came before us to realize that we are imbued with a kind of responsibility. And it is up to us to build upon their sacrifices to preserve what we have today.
Agreed. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Jonathan, for coming on. Thank you for all your sacrifice, because it is a true sacrifice that you have made for the Jewish community to take on this role and to do what you're doing. And people, I don't think, give you an ounce of credit for the amount of sacrifice that you deal with. You didn't have to have security guards around your family all the time before you took this job. You didn't have to do anything like that. You lived a normal, free life, and you had a great life. But you're sacrificing to live this amazing, noble position, and I really appreciate it. And on the second side, for all the people who are struggling and dealing with this anti-hatred against Jews, be more proudful, and the Jews will default, and the Jews will pick you up, and we will surround you with love and care. But reach out to us, reach out to the ADL, reach out to other organizations, and we will be in your corner. and we will promote you. We will boost you up, and we will continue to embolden you to be more proud of yourself. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you to all of our
We're all
listeners.
stronger together. We're stronger together.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This podcast episode is provided for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute investment advice, a recommendation, or an offer to buy or sell any security. Any views expressed are general in nature and may not be appropriate for all individuals. Investing involves risk, including the possible loss of principal. Climate Financial is a DBA of the Partners Wealth Management and SEC registered investment advisor. Registration with the SEC does not imply a certain level of skill or training. Any references to client experiences or outcomes are not intended to be representative of any one client's experience, and there is no guarantee that any particular outcome will be achieved. References to any funds or tickers are for informational purposes only. Investors should review the applicable prospectus for information about investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses.